Welcome to the Daily Agenda. It's Remembrance Day again. I've noticed this week, it was quite sad to see as well in truth, an elderly veteran. I think he was 100 years old on television, and he said that the sacrifice wasn't worth it because of the state of the country. And obviously what he was referring to there was mass immigration and the massive assault on Britishness and our culture, and it's happening all over the Western world, isn't it? The Great Replacement, which is not a conspiracy theory, it is a conspiratorial fact, policy fact, announced by the United Nations. Great Replacement migration. So that's really what he meant. And it's not the first time I've heard it either, quite frankly, not at all. Oh no. No, I recollect vividly being on Brick Lane with the British National Party in 1992. And an elderly veteran came up to us there, and I actually felt for the man. You know, he was wearing a long overcoat, you know, with his flat cap, etc. Salt of the earth type, good old Londoner, and he'd fought in the infantry in the Second World War. I remember him saying exactly the same thing. It wasn't worth it. We fought on the wrong side. We should never have gone to war with Germany when the real enemy was the Soviet Union. Absolutely right. Completely agree with that. However, there was another alternative, heavily armed neutrality, which was an alternative that was offered to Britain. But the problem is, the likes of Winston Churchill were ensconced in this sort of enmeshed bribery. The Sir Henry Thrakosh, better not mention anymore, we're getting banned, won't we, by censorship. But I'm sure all nationalists know what I'm referring to. Yes, of course they do. Absolutely, I don't need to educate those who've already been educated. So, was it worth it? Well, in truth, look around at the shithole this country has become, with its tyrannical system of government, police state, elective dictatorship, legislative tyranny. No, that's not what anyone fought for. They fought for completely the opposite outcome. So, of course, you know, these veterans who fought in the Second World War, those who are still surviving, don't believe it's worth it. I'm not saying all of them, but many of them. I've heard it many times. I've even heard it here from veterans in this town who survived the Second World War. And they would speak to me, obviously, because I was in the British National Party. I was senior in the British National Party. And I've heard it many times. I've heard it across the country. It's not uncommon. So if the news media want to portray this as, oh, it's just an aberration, it's just one bitter old man. Oh, yes, of course. Well, it would be one bitter old man, wouldn't it? Standing up for his country yet again at that age. Absolutely. You know, so on this day, you know, I remember mainly my great-grandfather, William Mellor, who was killed in action in October 1917 at the Second Battle of Ypres. He left behind him two young children, Mary and Jenny. And Jenny was my grandmother. And whilst Mary was old enough to remember her father just, Jenny wasn't. And shortly after the war, their mother, Harriet, my great-grandmother, died of what we now know today as Crohn's disease. And she became heavily infected, you know, a fistula between the bowel and the bladder, causing septicemia. And there was no antibiotics available to them, so obviously she died. You know, my poor great-grandmother, Harriet. And I always remember her too, because, you know, she was a casualty of the war, and there were so many women like her, and her children were also casualties of war. Their fathers never came back to them. What did they die for? I'm still at a loss to understand what they died for. When I look at the local war memorial here, I always think exactly the same thing. And I walk by it nearly every day. And I think to myself, what did these men die for? What did these men die for? In fact, I was walking through a graveyard 3 or 4 weeks ago. And, you know, there's 2 or 3 military burials there. And I stopped and looked at one of them. And he was 21 years old. And I thought, yeah, what did he die for? Remind me again. What did he die for? Remind me again. Was it worth it? Was the sacrifice worth it? Well, so many veterans say it wasn't. And I have to say the sacrifice was not worth it to create this absolute shithole of a country in which we are being replaced. No, it most definitely was not worth it. It was not worth it. And and I think of my 2 colleagues Peter Bullock and Jason Winter, light infantry regiment, who I trained with at Winchester in Hampshire. And in fact, the last time I saw Jason, he was actually on punishment duty again, unsurprisingly, having been back squatted twice. That's no disgrace to Jason. I understand why I understood totally why he wanted to get out of the army, and they wouldn't let him leave, and he was on punishment detail again, basically painting the regimental cannon, and that was the last time I saw him, and I was leaving the barracks, and yeah, a year later, he was dead, killed at Ballygawley in a bus bombing, IRA, IED. The East Tyrone Brigade. Mercifully, in their case, the entire East Tyrone Brigade was wiped out by the SAS within 10 days. Swift, instant justice, the way it should always have been in Northern Ireland. But the government, for the vast majority of that Operation Banner phase, would not allow the government, the army, to take the gloves off and wipe out the IRA and the INLA, which is exactly what should have happened. Again, so I think of them this morning and I remember them vividly. I remember the first time I ever saw Peter Bullock, and he was stood to the right of me. He was about 3 or 4 inches taller than me. And I think of Jason Winter, and and I asked myself, and this is no disgrace to them or to their families at all. That's not the point I'm trying to put across here. And I have to ask myself, what did they die for? Was it worth it? And practically everyone in this country is asking the same question. Was it worth it? Was the sacrifice worth it? Of course we should honour and remember them. Absolutely right. That is the right and proper thing to do. But we also have to ask the question, was it worth it? And I'll guarantee you the vast majority of veterans are asking the same thing. Apart from the boot-clicking types with a million medals, which they've never earned in any combat. I can tell you that for a fact. I knew an SBS sergeant in London called Steve, and he said, I never go to any war memorial. He said, in his own words, he said, real soldiers don't turn up at war memorials. They were his own words. Real soldiers don't turn up at war memorials. In his opinion, any plastic soldiers turned up. And they were the words of Steve, and he went on to become a private military contractor. I don't know what happened to him after I last saw him in London, but that's how Steve felt about his military service. Okay? So don't go thinking everybody's as proud as Punch having served in the military, because that just isn't the case at all. It's just a delusion that people are lost in a dream world if they think that's the case. It isn't the case. I guarantee you it is not the case. And then I think of my cousin, Ryan Tomlin, from Hertfordshire, killed in Afghanistan, RAF regiment, shot by a Taliban sniper. And again, no disrespect to my cousins in Hertfordshire, but what did Ryan die for? What did Ryan die for? The Afghanis are invading this country. Yeah? Do you get the point I'm making? What did he actually die for? And this is a question that everybody needs to ask themselves. And until we actually stop mass immigration and embark on mass remigration and create a 95% white supermajority in this country, then when that is done, I suppose quite clearly that we'll be able to feel that sense of nationalistic pride again that we should have when attending the cenotaph or war memorials across the country. Because at this moment in time, all I'm left asking on Remembrance Day is, was it worth it? And I have to conclude it most definitely was not worth it. And that's no disgrace to anyone who served in the armed forces, particularly those who sacrificed their lives. I've got them in my own family, okay? We paid the blood price. So don't anyone think they can lecture me. We've paid the blood price. And I speak on behalf, I think, of the vast majority of people in this country who do think the same thing. And if you were to speak to them privately, they would say it wasn't worth it. And I think the vast majority of white Brits do believe that, because at the end of the day, we don't believe it's worth it. I honour and respect all the men and women who died in the World Wars, and also in Operation Banner and the Falklands. I knew people in the Falklands War. In fact, my sister's former partner was a gunner, in the Falklands War. And yeah, I mean, I have to close on that essential question. Do you believe it was worth it? And the only way to ensure that it was worth it is to retake control of this country again, stop immigration and embark upon mass remigration. And then, most definitely, you'll be able to say it was worth it. We'll all be able to say it was worth it. But at this moment in time, we are being deliberately replaced and persecuted by an evil regime for speaking out against it. As such, it most definitely was not worth it, because in the words of the elderly veteran this week, who said, the sacrifice wasn't worth it to create a country like this, because they didn't fight to create a country like this. They fought to preserve what they believed was freedom, and freedom of expression and individual liberty. And all of that has been robbed by neo-communists, because in truth, in 1939, the real enemy was the Soviet Union. Okay? The wrong enemy. The wrong enemy is what we picked. And that's my honest opinion. If you don't like it, no problem. I don't care. It's called freedom of expression. If you don't like freedom of expression, who cares? Like I could care. But I remember the fallen this day, particularly those in my own family. And if you have people who've fallen in your family, then you should remember them likewise. But ultimately, was it worth it? No, we can't say it was worth it until we retake control of this country and make it Britain again. Thank you for tuning in.